fun seeing this here. When you go to church in Ghana, you do your stretching out ahead of time and you take a shower afterwards. Below all to learn that. So the AICs, as we talked about the Good News Seminary, it is a seminary for leadership of the AICs. The reason we use the abbreviation is because it stands for different things. Originally, it was used about 100 years ago, a little less, for the African independent churches. And then it started to stand for the African initiated churches. These are groups that were not initiated by foreign missions. And it also can stand for the African indigenous churches. Not initiated by foreign missions, they are the witness of the Holy Spirit and the power of God. And they identify the Christian message within their own culture. Africa's huge, right? There is more diversity than uniformity among the AICs. One of the common features is that they are truly Trinitarian. There's an appreciation of God the Creator, certainly Jesus Christ, but an appreciation of the Holy Spirit, which is sometimes similar to Pentecostal churches here, but arises from their own soil. So they are spirit-initiated, spirit-sustained. We sometimes say that they are in the vernacular of the traditions, not just the language, the local language, but also the traditions, the types of music across the continent, and what it means to worship, what it means to come together as a community, what it means to see the gospel, to be liberated, to serve, to appreciate an ancient history. And it arises from within their own ways of thinking and speaking about things. In talking about the AICs, we have to mention the word syncretism. Syncretism is the heresy of warping a faith's truth to fit into a particular culture. And the AICs are still often seen by some mission groups, international groups, as syncretist. I just could go on a long time or a very short time for how I feel about American evangelicals, talking about culture being overlapping too much with the faith tradition. So I'll just go with the short version of that. We all worship out of our culture, let's say that. As I said, Africa is large, diverse, but it is appropriate to talk about the AICs as a group because the continent has a history of encounter with European Christianity. There are ancient traditions of Christianity, Ethiopia, Libya, other places along the East Coast, just as there are in other places around the world. The gospel did spread very far within the first century. But European Christians weren't aware of those traditions, also had a phenomenal amount of racism and political drive, and European Christianity traveled alongside colonialism. So, for better or for worse, often the missionaries were trying to stave off the effects of colonialism, but those two forces worked together. Mennonites, from our very beginnings, have not been very keen on traveling alongside armies, and not so keen on that partnership, but as the Mennonite population in North America gained some safety and stability, the late 1800s, early 1900s, we started to join in missionary activity. India was a long-term, was an early mission field for Europeans, English-speaking people, because it was a British colony, and was one of the biggest mission fields for Mennonites at the beginning. Central Africa was kind of the next generation of missionaries moved into there. By that time, they had seen some of the really negative effects of doing evangelism alongside, trying to do church planting alongside colonial structures. And my family's history was coming along 80 years later and seeing the church still consumed in politics rather than understanding the gospel. And so when that next generation came in the 30s and 40s into Central Africa, they said, we're not here to plant churches. There was this amazing trust in the Holy Spirit, that this was God's church, and the Holy Spirit would find a way to do this that would be authentic and living out of the African soil. So there was an early cooperation between the Mennonite missions and the AICs, an identification and a wish to serve them, and wish to serve as called by the local church. And some of the leaders in that movement in the Mennonite missions were in Nigeria and in Central Africa. Ghana is the country where people flee to. As I mentioned earlier, it's been an incredibly peaceful place. Has never had a civil war. It's, many organizations end up having their headquarters in Ghana because they had come from somewhere else at the time of war. And that was also the story of the Mennonite missions who came into Ghana and the beginnings of Good News Seminary and all that West picked that up.
Top right corner of the Mediterranean in modern Syria. Okay. So now in the church in Antioch, there were prophets and teachers. Barnabas, Simon, who was called Niger, therefore was probably black, Lucius of Cyrene, and therefore probably black, Manaen, the member of the court of Herod and ruler, and Saul. Some of the African members of the early church. So, let me do this first. As Deb mentioned, the good news, the Mennonite missionaries who were in Nigeria were forced because of war to leave. And they ran away, because that was the most sensible thing to do. And so they went to Ghana, because it was safe in Ghana, and there was food there, which is also a good thing. And these missionaries decided that they were going to work with the local churches. And so they started the Good News Sunday School class, which then became the Good News Bible Institute, which then became the Good News Theological College and Seminary, which then became the Good News Theological Seminary. So that's where we were. The Good News Theological Seminary has had long association with the Mennonite Church and with the Lutheran Church. So both groups, and the Lutherans have deeper pockets. So in some ways they're more central, but both groups have been working together, which is unusual, unfortunately, for missionaries, in supporting this particular seminary. That's not in Ghana. That's actually was our house in Newton, Kansas, and that's roughly what it looked like the day we left for Ghana. It was cold, and because it was in Kansas, it was windy, and it was snowy and icy and gross. So we left there, and after 24 hours, we arrived here, in the dark, which is probably better. You get off the plane in Ghana, and suddenly it's 90 degrees with 90% humidity, when you having just come from the cold and the snow. And this was our first place to live. In Ghana, there's a lot of half-finished construction. There's lots of theological, philosophical, sociological, and economic reasons for that. But anyway, this is one of the half-finished construction. This is someday going to be, God willing, a large fourplex. But only part of it obviously was finished. So this was our part. So you can see here where our clothes are hanging. I had been running because they're not running clothes. And this is actually our living room, which obviously is not quite as finished as it could be. And behind there was our kitchen and dining room. So what we lived in was actually the 3 bedrooms. So we had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and that was it. So 1 bedroom became living room, 1 bedroom became office, and the hallway became kitchen dining room. And that's Big Bertha, the suitcase. So this is where we lived for the first while. But not all the campus looks like this. And this was our neighbors. Actually, only once in the year we lived there were there cows in the front yard. But it was worth a picture. It also, in the background, was our nearest restaurant. So when we wanted to go out for supper, we could actually just ask them and they would bring supper to us because it was nice and close. This is one of the main buildings at Good News Theological College and Seminary. The upstairs portion is library and offices. The downstairs portion is men's dormitory. There's another women's dormitory building sort of across the road, but this is sort of offices, library, and men's dorm. This is the classroom building. So again, like large modern buildings built in a very typical Ghanaian style. That's a mango tree, by the way. This is Reverend Dr. Oduro and his wife Jemima. They lived right next door to us, and he was the president of the seminary. Still is the president of the seminary. Reverend Dr. Oduro and Thomas and I are actually both born on September the 9th. So we share a birthday, which I found very interesting. In Ghana, everybody knows the day of the week they were born on. How many of you know the day of the week you were born on? That's more than I was expecting. Okay, so I'm a Friday born, which in Ghana makes me a Kofi, and he is also Friday born. So we were born also on the same day of the week. He's just 5 years older than I am, because the whole leap year thing. And more neighbors. Those guys were everywhere. They were very shy. After all, we moved into this house, which is about 100 yards from the other house. And so this is a very sort of much more typical. It's a 3-bedroom house. Obviously, a few more palm trees than you typically have around here. So I'll back up. So the white railing there, right behind here, is the front porch. And so every morning the sun comes up at 6 o'clock, and I would make myself a cup of coffee, and I'd go sit on the front porch. And there was good front porch sitting weather 365 days of the year. Well, most of the time it was too hot, but that was the way it was. So the view from the front porch is, this. This was a rainy day.
So that's the driveway.
So that's our driveway off to the bottom right-hand corner there. Right, and that's our closest store. So when we wanted to go to the store, it wasn't very far away. And Jemima ran that store. She was typically there 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, except for Sunday morning. It also gives you a sense of when it rains in Ghana, it rains in Ghana. And so there's rivers of mud flowing past. Yes, the ground is all sort of this reddish color. There is nothing that looks like topsoil. Also explains why it is you should be careful when you hang out laundry. Not our laundry line. Students. So I just wanted to show you some pictures of students. They all have these sort of typical desks. I am the only professor who gathered students into groups to talk to each other. Otherwise, they all lined up in straight rows and took notes the whole time. because that was their educational system. So they couldn't figure out this strange white man who had them talk to each other, but we figured it out after a while. This is what the chapel looked like. The chapel was just a converted classroom. So it was classroom, and then brought in the pulpit, and it became chapel. So there's some of my students in the back. The professors were sitting on chairs in the back. Lots of plastic chairs everywhere. So those plastic chairs there are very typical of what you'd see around here. I was not allowed to carry those chairs around, to move those chairs. If I ever picked one of those up and moved it somewhere, my students were very embarrassed because I'm an elder and not allowed to work. And that's considered work. And so anytime I'd be walking toward the classroom with books, some student would come running and carry my book from me. I remember very clearly one time I was just typically walking to the class, carrying some books, and this big Nigerian dude comes, no, prof, you cannot carry these books. Here, let me carry them. And so he takes them from me, and then he hands them immediately to this tiny woman beside him, and she gets to actually do the carrying while he and I walked. And I tried to explain to him how terribly embarrassing this was for a North American man to have the small little woman carrying the heavy load while the men are just walking and talking. And so just these cross-cultural events all the time. So this is sitting around eating. So this is Pastor Augustine, who's pastor of the Somanyang Mennonite Church that you saw pictures of with the kids. Here's Godwin, who's also a Mennonite pastor. Those were the only two Mennonite pastors I knew, but they just happened to be in the same picture. And otherwise, these are students sitting around and eating. This was probably, we didn't do this very often, so this is actually probably my birthday celebration from one of our years there. They like to be goofy. Ghanaians laugh all of the time. Anytime there's any sort of tension in the room, somebody makes a joke. And yeah. And they love pictures. This was after chapel. Oh, Prof, we have to take some pictures. A larger gathering of professors and students. This was at our farewell. Most of Ghana is fairly flat, but we live close to the sort of the mountain-ish region. We went up there one time and took some pictures with students. Mice. Never sure how to say this because I think of this as something I did on summer vacation, but when you're in a place that has summer 12 months of the year, they don't really think of this as summer vacation. They call it long break. Anyway, during my second long break, me and two students totally rearranged their library. There's 24,000 books in that library, and we rearranged every one of them. So I spent the summer-ish in the library. That's what the library looks like. That's what a mango tree looks like in bloom. Mango trees in bloom are not very pretty. The flowers are brown, but it's always good to see. That's what a real mango looks like. That's how big they are. That's my phone there and a big pen. So they're really that big. So the seed of that mango is way bigger than any mango you could buy here in the city. This is what happens when you go to the Mennonite church and the pastor says, "Oh, Pastor, would you like to take some mangoes home with you?" And I say, "Oh yeah, maybe 3 or 4. This is his adding problem. Right? So the next time I went there, I said, "Oh yes, I'd like some mangoes, but how about just 1 or 2? And then he sent me 4 or 5. So the next time I talked to him, I said, "Oh, Pastor, when I asked for 4 or 5 mangoes, you sent me 10 or 12, and when I asked for 1 or 2 mangoes, you sent me 4 or 5. So when you counsel someone and say you should only have 1 man and 1 woman in a marriage, how many do you actually need?" He assured me that no, he meant 1 in that case. Orange trees, construction. So there's always construction going on somewhere. This is construction actually at the seminary. I wanted to end here. This is one of the slave castles. So from this castle, thousands and thousands and thousands of Ghanaians were shipped to the West Indies to work on the sugar plantations. So the door that the slaves first went into is this door down here. And it goes steeply down into the earth where it's dark and unimaginable in a lot of ways. And what makes this especially horrible is that this is the chapel. And they did that without any sense of irony. So, yeah, part of the history of Ghana that is just part of their world. So I think we're just going to stop there. So despite this history, the church in Ghana wants to be in a relationship with us. And we need to figure out how we're going to do that, because it's a long way away. But it's going to be worth it, and it's going to be fun. And if you don't want to have fun, then don't go to Ghana. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been good to see the slides and to think about old friends. We want to end with hymn number 611.